So this next little bit here, we're looking at some of the accessory organs that play into the gastrointestinal tract or the digestive tract, the alimentary canal. Um, and so these accessory organs that we're looking at here actually will dump their secretions into the duodenum, and then that's going to help to facilitate that digestion there. And so the liver has a lot of functions, but its only digestive function is to produce bile. And bile is going to help to emulsify fats. And what emulsification means is taking a big fat droplet and breaking it down into more absorbable particles. The liver can regenerate itself. Um, Even if about 80% of it has been removed or destroyed, it can restore. And that's because upon injury, the hepatocytes, which are the liver cells, will secrete growth factors that help to proliferate the endothelial cell lining. Hepatitis and cirrhosis are examples of homeostatic imbalances with the liver. Um, and hepatitis usually occurs from a viral infection, in addition to some other things there. And then cirrhosis is a chronic inflammation, either from chronic hepatitis or alcoholism can cause this. So bile is, like I said, it emulsifies fats, and it's kind of a yellowy green color. It's very alkaline solution, and it has bilirubin, which forms the pigment, and then bile salts. And the bile salts are really derivatives of cholesterol that help to, again, emulsify fats and help to facilitate that absorption. The bilirubin, again, is the pigment that's formed here from heme. So when hemoglobin is broken down, heme forms that bilirubin. And bacteria can break it down in the intestines as well to a pigment that really pertains to the brown color of our feces. And so what bile can break down here are, basically, or what bile contains, are really just cholesterol, some neutral fats, and then also phospholipids and electrolytes. And what it's showing here is taking this big fat droplet and then breaking it down into smaller fat droplets. Also in the liver, so the hepatocytes, the liver cells, have a lot of rough and smooth ER, so they can process different proteins. Smooth ER, remember, is dealing with detoxification, as well as peroxisomes to some extent. There's energy required to do this, and then the Golgi will help to transport different proteins. And there's numerous other functions as well, so processing different nutrients, detoxification, producing a ton of bile, and then storing our fat-soluble vitamins. Another important accessory organ is the gallbladder, and so the liver is what produces bile, but the storage and release of bile comes from the gallbladder. So gallstones, when those occur, that means there's very high cholesterol but too few bile salts. And so gallstones really are kind of a crystallized form of that cholesterol. And so not only does it impede flow of bile from the gallbladder, but when the gallbladder is contracting against it to release the bile, it's contracting against those very sharp crystals, which can cause a lot of pain. And this can be treated. Then we have the pancreas. Got a couple slides in the pancreas, so we'll start with this one here. So the pancreas has an endocrine function and an exocrine function. So endocrine function, like we looked at in lab tonight, is producing and releasing hormones into the blood. And so insulin and glucagon are released in response to changes in blood sugar levels. Whereas the exocrine function, that means that products are being released not into the bloodstream, but basically into the epithelial cell surface. And so the exocrine function is to produce pancreatic juice. And what this is, so there's a couple different examples here. This digestive juice from the pancreas has enzymes capable of digesting all four of our macromolecules. So amylase breaks down carbohydrates, lipase breaks down lipase breaks down lipids, protease breaks down proteins, and then nucleases can break down nucleic acids. Also, the pancreatic juice is very watery, but also has a lot of electrolytes like bicarbonate, and that's going to keep it kind of alkaline.
Sorry for the wait while this comes up. It should be any second now.
So this slide here looks, albeit a little bit confusing, but this is going to show kind of the combination of secretions from the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, and their effect on the bloodstream and also the duodenum. So here we have the liver, here's the gallbladder, the stomach, duodenum, and then here's the pancreas. And then this little ring around here is the bloodstream. So if we kind of follow the order here, when chyme enters the duodenum, so right here, that's going to cause cells to release two hormones called cholecystokinin, which has been abbreviated CCK, and secretin. Now CCK is represented by the red dots and secretin by the yellow dots. So those hormones now are going to enter the bloodstream. So here they are in the bloodstream. What happens then is that CCK, which is in red, is going to travel to the pancreas and regulate and help to secrete that very enzyme-rich pancreatic juice. So this is going to be those enzymes that can break down all four of our macromolecules. And then secretin, these yellow dots, will also travel to the pancreas and help to secrete the bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice. So both hormones have an effect right here on the pancreas, but CCK is allowing the release of the enzyme-rich juice, and then secretin of the bicarbonate-rich juice. Then, at the same time, there is still some secretin and CCK moving in the bloodstream, and so secretin and bile salts are going to help stimulate the liver to produce bile a little bit more quickly, and then CCK, again, via the bloodstream, is going to travel to the gallbladder and help it to contract. Ultimately, when this contracts, that's going to move the bile into the cystic duct, and then into the common bile duct, and then that's going to empty into the duodenum. Here it's talking about the hepatopancreatic sphincter, and that's really just this region right here that opens, and that's going to allow bile to come in through the common bile duct, and then here's that pancreatic duct. And then also during different phases that the nervous system can control, the vagus nerve can stimulate the gallbladder to also contract. So here, again, just looking at the combination of all these different organs and hormones working together. So other digestive functions in the small intestine, again with help from the accessory organs, so that the chyme that enters from the stomach is going to contain carbohydrates and proteins that are partially digested. Remember, carbohydrates from the mouth, proteins from the stomach, and some undigested fats. So it takes several hours for food to move through the small intestine. At this point, almost all of the nutrients are absorbed, and most of the water is too. The small intestine, just like the stomach, doesn't have any role in the other processes of digestion, such as ingestion or defecation. Within the small intestine, there are two types of motion, and so peristalsis, which I think we talked about in the esophagus, this is initiated by a hormone called motilin, and this occurs every about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And this is going to help to move remnants of the meal and bacteria and debris into the large intestine. And it takes about 2 hours to move from the duodenum into the ileum. And then segmentation also mixes food rather than having kind of a pumping action. So peristalsis is kind of a pumping with the workings of circular muscle here and then longitudinal muscle to move it down this way. But segmentation is more of a mixing, and so kind of taking two segments next to each other, and then by these muscles here contracting and relaxing, it's going to mix these two together. And so we can tell that here by kind of the coloration that they're using to show that. The large intestine then, remember that food is going to enter the large intestine from the ileum of the small intestine. So some of the unique features, there are 3 bands of longitudinal muscle that I'm kind of tracing here. These are called the teniae coli, or coli, and that helps to move food or foodstuff residues through the haustra, and haustra are kind of these puckered regions here. When the tone or when the teniae coli contract, it's going to help to move these haustra. And then the epiploic appendages, these are the kind of fat-filled little pouches, kind of like little tassels that we can see on the cadaver. And then remember, we have the cecum. The appendix hangs from there, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and the sigmoid colon, and then out through the rectum and anus. Microscopically, there's a pretty thick mucosa of simple columnar epithelium in the large intestine, except that the anal canal is stratified squamous epithelium, again because it encounters a lot of friction. There are no structural modifications like the small intestine, so there's no circular folds, there's no villi, there's no digestive secretions, but there are some kind of deep pockets or crypts that have goblet cells, which again are what produce the mucus. Hemorrhoids, for example, can occur in the anal canal if the superficial venous plexuses become inflamed. So remember, a plexus is a network, and so the veins in that region. So looking at some function, so the food residue at this point is pretty much feces. So tons of bacteria, it stays in the large intestine for about a half to a full day. There's no food breakdown except that bacteria can break down some additional food residues. There is some reabsorption occurring, so there is some absorption basically from the large intestine into the blood, and that's going to be vitamins, which are primarily made by the resident bacteria, and then electrolytes and water. And so that's why diarrhea can be such a problem, because there isn't a chance for the body to reabsorb that water and electrolytes, which is why the stools are so much more loose or watery, and so basically you're losing that water and the electrolytes, and you're not getting absorbed. So really the major functions of the large intestine is to propel the feces to the anus, and then defecation is expulsion of the feces from the body. The colon actually isn't necessary or is essential for life. There are ways to eliminate without it. Because I love microbiology, here's a little slide on the bacterial flora, so the resident bacteria that live in our colon. And so they're going to synthesize some vitamins, especially vitamin K, and then metabolize some molecules there. So metabolize mucin, which is kind of a precursor to mucus, heparin, that thins blood, hyaluronic acid, which is also found in some cells, and then what it does do is ferment or break down undigested carbohydrates, and the byproduct of this is gas or flatulence. Movement through the large intestine is mostly contractions of those haustra, which we saw on the first slide. These are kind of slower, more segmented movements, and these haustra will contract in sequence. And that is in response to distension, so once the large intestine becomes distended. And then we have what's called the gastrocolon reflex, and this is just initiated by having food in the stomach, and that activates very slow, what are called mass movements in the colon. So really, putting food in the stomach is prepping the body to eliminate what's already in the large intestine to basically kind of make room. So once those mass movements have occurred in the large intestine, that's going to force the feces toward the rectum, and once that rectal wall is distended, that will initiate the spinal defecation reflex. And this is stimulated through the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, that's our resting and digesting. So that is going to stimulate contraction of the sigmoid colon and the rectum, and will relax the internal anal sphincter. So that's kind of the urge, the I gotta go. And then the conscious control will allow you to voluntarily relax the external anal sphincter for defecation. So lastly, here are some developmental aspects of the digestive system. So the placenta is what is delivering nutrition to a growing fetus, but the gastrointestinal tract can be stimulated to mature by any amniotic fluid that might be swallowed in utero. And then newborns are going to have a rooting reflex, which helps the infant to find the nipple, and then a sucking reflex to actually swallow. And newborns grow rather quickly, and they can actually double their birth weight in about 6 months, and usually are on some type of adult diet by about 2 years of age. Some things that can occur, so cysts or ulcers, can be problems of middle age. And then also as we age, that GI tract activity can decline. There's less juices, less digestive juices being secreted. Absorption is less efficient. That peristalsis is slower, which can all lead to less frequent bowel movements. Taste and smell can become less acute, and periodontal disease can develop in the teeth. And finally, so things like diverticulitis and fetal incontinence and cancer of any part of the GI tract can occur as well. This last slide here again kind of wraps it all together. So the 6 major processes of the digestive system. So ingestion is introducing food into the mouth. Then it has to be propelled. It's going to be mechanically broken down by chewing. Chemical digestion starts in the mouth with salivary amylase. Then that food is propelled via swallowing and then peristaltic movement through the esophagus into the stomach, where we have also some mechanical digestion with churning, as well as chemical digestion, so the breakdown of proteins. This all involves water, so these water droplets here. Remember that the breakdown of large products into smaller ones is called hydrolysis, so adding water to break things down. Then as that food moves through the small intestine here, there is some segmentation, some peristalsis to move that food through, a little bit of digestion from pancreatic enzymes and bile, and then that absorption occurs into the blood vessel and also into the lymphatic vessel. By the time the food is at the end of the small intestine, it's pretty much feces, enters into the large intestine where there is some water and electrolyte absorption, but finally then whatever hasn't been digested, those feces will be expelled through the anus through defecation.